Picture the most powerful restaurant chain in 1950s America. You're probably thinking of McDonald's and its golden arches. You'd be so wrong. The biggest lunch operation in the country lived inside a dime store, at a long counter with chrome stools and a soda fountain. And the person running it was a waitress in a hairnet and a pressed uniform who knew half the town by name. At its peak, WoolWorth's ran nearly 2,000 lunch counters across America. In 1964, McDonald's had barely 600 restaurants. WoolWorth's fed more of America in more towns than almost anyone. And then the entire thing vanished so completely that most people under 50 have never heard of it. This is what it was like to work that counter in the 1950s, and why one of these counters ended up in a museum. It's a Tuesday morning in 1955, in a mid-sized American town. You're 23. You walk through the front doors of the F.W. Woolworth Company store on Main Street, past shelves of hair ribbons, goldfish, sewing thread, and toy soldiers. Everything priced at a nickel or a dime. That's why they call it the 5 and dime. At the back of the store, or along one long wall, is your world. A gleaming counter, sometimes 60, 70 stools long, with red vinyl seats, a mirrored back wall, and a soda fountain of polished chrome. You tie your apron, pin your paper cap, and check your section. Every waitress owns a stretch of that counter, maybe 12 or 15 stools, and for the next 8 hours, everything that happens on those stools is yours. The store was proud of that counter in a way that's hard to imagine now. Every utensil was seamless stainless steel. The dishes ran through automatic sterilizers. The company advertised its kitchens like laboratories, all fluorescent light and refrigeration, because in the 1950s, this was the modern way to eat. And here's a detail almost nobody knows. WoolWorth's put women in charge of most of these counters. In an America where women could barely get a business loan, the lunch counter manager at the biggest dime store in town was very often a woman. At 11:30, the stools start filling. And now you become 3 people at once. You're a waitress, taking orders down the line and calling them back to the kitchen in counter shorthand. A grilled cheese is a GC. Coffee is a drawer. You'll learn to stack orders in your head, 6, 8, 10 deep, and deliver them in sequence without writing most of them down. You're a soda jerk because the fountain is yours too. Cherry Cokes mixed by hand from syrup, 1 squirt or 2 depending on the customer, and you know which. Root beer floats, malted spinning on the green Hamilton beach mixers. Banana splits built in glass boats, 3 scoops, 3 sauces, whipped cream, a cherry. When a kid orders one for a quarter, you build it right in front of him, and you make it look easy, because the show is part of the job, and you're the town's front desk. The regulars come every single day. The retired railroad man who takes his coffee, black at the 3rd stool, and tips a dime. The sales girls from the dress shop across the street who have 25 minutes for lunch. So their tuna sandwiches hit the counter before they finish sitting down. Mothers with shopping bags and cranky toddlers, and you keep a stash of extra cherries for the toddlers. You know who got married, who got hired, whose son is stationed in Germany. People tell a lunch counter waitress things they'd never tell a neighbor. Now look at what's coming out of that kitchen, because this menu will surprise people who think dime store food meant junk. Roast turkey with mashed potatoes and gravy, baked Swiss steak, fried fish plates, homemade vegetable soup for 30 cents. WoolWorth's bought surplus straight from local farms, dairy, vegetables, whole turkeys at bargain prices, which is why a full hot dinner at this counter cost less than $1. Decades before anyone said farm to table, you were serving it for pocket change. The pace at noon is brutal. 60 stools, a line of shoppers standing behind them waiting their turn, and the whole system built on speed. Fast food off the grill, fast turnover on the stools. A good counter could serve 1,000 people through a lunch rush. Your feet know it by 2 o'clock. Your pay is modest, a small hourly wage plus the coins left beside the plates, and on a good Saturday the tips in your apron pocket outweigh the paycheck. This job puts groceries on your family's table, and for plenty of women in the 1950s, it's the first money that's ever been entirely their own. But there's something else about this counter you need to understand. Something that turned it into one of the most important pieces of furniture in American history. Because for all its warmth, this counter had a line running through it that nobody could see and everybody knew. In the American South, black customers could shop the aisles of WoolWorth's and spend their money anywhere in the store, except on those stools. The counter was whites only. On February the 1st, 1960, in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 black college students walked into their local WoolWorth's, bought school supplies at the register, then sat down at the lunch counter and ordered coffee. They were refused. They stayed until closing. The next day, they came back with more students. Within weeks, sit-ins were spreading across the South, and the humble dime store counter, the same kind of counter you wipe down every night, became the front line of the civil rights movement. That July, the Greensboro counter served its first black customers. Today, a section of it sits in the Smithsonian in Washington. A lunch counter, in the same museum as the flag and the moon rocks. That's how much happened on those stools. So where did it all go? Slowly, and then completely. Through the 60s and 70s, the fast food chains that WoolWorth's once dwarfed came for lunch. Drive-thrus followed the customers out to the suburbs, while the dime stores sat downtown. And downtowns themselves were emptying as the malls opened. When a WoolWorth's started struggling, the lunch counter was usually the first thing cut. The counters faded through the 70s and 80s, and in 1997, the F.W. Woolworth Company closed its last American stores. A retail empire that once had more restaurants than anyone in the country, gone to the last stool. And something disappeared with it that no drive-thru ever replaced. A counter has no tables, no booths, no walls between strangers. The banker sat next to the plumber, elbow to elbow, eating the same 30-cent soup, served by a waitress who knew them both. For millions of Americans, that counter was the town square with a menu. When it closed, the regulars, some of whom had met there for coffee every morning for 30 years, simply had nowhere to go. The women who worked those counters are in their 80s and 90s now. Ask them about it, and they'll tell you about aching feet, impossible lunch rushes, and customers they still remember by order. First stool, coffee, black, no sugar. Almost none of them will tell you it was just a job.